the show at the Academy in 1980 on Garber, and that was when I learned about this picture. It was far, far away in Alabama at the time, so we couldn't borrow it, but I knew about it and loved it even then, and have loved it every time I've met it. And so when Jerry announced that he was acquiring this picture, I was extremely happy, and I'm here to talk not just about how happy I am about that, but why this picture makes me happy, and I think why it makes a lot of people happy. I mean, you've seen this picture now, it's a situation of like, what's not to like about this picture, and part of me might be saying, well, this is just our Bucks County provincialism. We love this picture because it is a Bucks County little girl, is by our own Daniel Garber, and maybe it's just because we love our own people. But in inserting the outside perspective on the bug, so to speak, I'm here to tell you, when this painting was in Spain in 1990 with an exhibition of American Impressionists, it was the most popular painting in the exhibition in Spain. So this is not just about Bucks County. This is about something in this picture that resounds to viewers. And so I want to talk a little bit today about what it is about this picture and why don't we get tired of looking at this picture? Why does everybody want to take this picture home and have it around the house? And so I'm going to go back to Garber's roots and talk about the Philadelphia figure painting tradition coming out of the Pennsylvania Academy. Oh, thank you. I'm not even noticing that because of the speaker. Thank you. Daniel Garber enormously admired Thomas Eakins, who is the grandfather of this tradition in his day, in the late 19th century. And Garber himself wrote about Eakins, commented, was interviewed about him. He said that of all the artists associated with Philadelphia, Eakins stands first. And Eakins was still alive when this picture was painted. He died in 1916. So he was around in Philadelphia. He was a juror at the Academy. He walked in and out. Garber knew him. They lived in the same neighborhood. Garber lived a few blocks away on the same street. So he was a living entity for Daniel Garber and was a literal model to him, although he was not actually his teacher. However, these two pictures summarize something of my idea in the title. Is it going to make this noise the whole time? Maybe I'll move it back. Is it this thing?
Yeah.
I just know that this is like a needle in your ear, so I don't want to continue to make you paint. The two paintings, between them, represent sunlight and shadow, but each of them internally is also about sunlight and shadow. Tanis is in the threshold of her father's studio, in a dark space where the artist is, looking out to sunlight, and likewise, Wade Cook, from the concert singer, this is a painting from 1892, is bathed in sunlight on one side and shaded on the other. So both of them are about this issue of sunlight and shadow, but we also can see that in a dozen years or a little bit more, a dramatic change, a revolution in figure painting in the Philadelphia region, which is part of what I'm going to talk about. Now the simple story is, Daniel Garber, throw away your black paint, go outside and paint. And then you go from Eakins to Tanis. That's the story of Impressionism, basically, to bring the key of your palette up, to go outdoors and work from the landscape. But it's actually much more complicated than that, to go from being an academic to being an impressionist. And in fact, what I want to talk about is not just the differences between these two artists, but also their similarities. Look, for example, at the frames, and I'm going to start with these pictures with frames on them, and I know everybody in Bucks County is much more frame conscious than most museum audiences. Garber has got a carrot rowing frame on him that is very characteristic of the frames of the New Hope School. Eakins has a frame he designed for his painting. It's very plain, but it's fundamentally an arts and crafts frame that he had carved into the base the music that Wade Cook is singing. It's a frame that was made particularly for this picture to add an element to the painting. And likewise, all of the Bucks County artists are famous for choosing frames that are very specially selected in order to enhance the picture. So Tanis has got this very lay-like, rather narrow, moving a frame with a little bit of motion on it that is just perfect for her. And Eakins, in his same way, was very self-conscious about the framing choice. So their choices are different, but their attention is the same. And that's kind of one of the ideas that I'm going to develop here. Looking at the two of them, the revolution that I'm describing is partly in style, but it's also in personality. Looking at way to cook, we have the classic interiority of an Eakins picture. A picture that tells you a lot about things that are actually invisible. Her mind, the song she's singing, things that are almost immaterial, that are housed somehow in a very physical body. That kind of interest in psychology is very characteristic of Eakins. It's not particularly characteristic of Garber. So there's a big contrast here in their attitudes. Garber, by contrast, is all about exteriority as opposed to in the interior life. He's about the surfaces, about the light bouncing off of things, about visuality, and about the moment. That contrast also makes me want to point out to you the way that the figure stands in the space. In Eakins, she stands back, she occupies a really big space away from the frame. The frame really doesn't have much to do with her. The core of the picture is around her figure. Eakins has not been especially interested in the design of the composition. Garber pulls Tanis way up to the front so she's right almost touching the picture plane, has her reach out and touch the edges of the frame, and then organizes the leaves and things around her in order to create a frame around her. Garber, in other words, very attentive to the two-dimensional design of the picture. That's a very powerful difference between the two of them. Whoops, that's fast. This is a pair of pictures that I think draws these two painters closer together. This is our beloved William Lathrop, Garber's fabulous picture of Lathrop, a kind of late exercise in portrait painting that Garber didn't go in for much, but when he went back to it in 1935, he really made a fantastic picture that really draws him very close to Eakins, because his comparing the Lathrop to Eakins' portrait of Harrison Morris, and I love this picture because Tanis, the painting, won the Harrison Morris Prize in 1916 that was given by this guy in Newport. He was the director, the managing director of the Pennsylvania Academy in the days when Garber was a student, so Garber would have known Harrison Morris as well. These two pictures, in a way, recapitulate some of the points that I made before about their styles, but Garber is coming much closer to Eakins now as he's growing older. What's different is the broken stroke that you can see, the stronger color that flickers across the background. But fundamentally, these two pictures remind you that although this Impressionist revolution has happened over the intervening decades, in fact, there is a kind of commonality. And in fact, both of these pictures strike out what is the great commonality between them, which is the dedication to working from nature, to looking very carefully and studying from life, which is really what gives the energy to both of these paintings. Well, if we think about their personalities, and here's Eakins in his studio in 1892, about the same time that he did the concert singer, I find completely mesmerizing. This little hatching stroke in pink and blue, so you get mixed colors side by side, which is also characteristic of Segantini, to break apart the colors and put them side by side rather than mixing them. It's a technique that Seurat used as well in Neo-Impressionism, and so that is, we can see this happening down Tanis's leg, and it's possible that there's a story here, but I think actually it's much more likely that he was looking at his own contemporaries who also were looking at Segantini. J. Almond Weir, who he admired, in fact really worshipped Weir, was very admiring about Segantini, and there are many other painters who were adopting this kind of broken stroke, so it's a little bit hard to say exactly where this is coming from. But looking at the issue of figure painting at large, he had a big pool of people that he could turn to for his examples. This is Frank Benson, a painter from Boston, particularly a group of artists called the Ten, who organized into an exhibition society called the Ten in 1898 that that Garber was a great fan of. I mean, he says, oh, I always look forward to those exhibitions of the 10. I found them so inspiring and exciting. So we know annually he was going to these exhibitions and learning from the example of the painters of the 10, such as Benson. Now, Benson is famous for the kinds of subjects of the artist family. These are all the artist girls being painted, but in full sunlight, outdoors. So you have a kind of glare almost. I mean, literally the figures have to put their hands up to shade their eyes because the sun is so strong. That kind of subject matter in the blinding sun, and then this holiday mood of people in summer vacation, ladies in white dresses, were the stock in trade of many artists like Benson, and especially the Boston School. In a quieter style, more like the surface that you saw on Eakins, is Joseph de Camp. Here is the Blue Cup from 1909 and a painting called The Violinist from 1902. De Camp, another member of the 10, who loved painting women indoors. So we have women outdoors in the full sun, and we have women indoors looking at a beautiful object. Now think about the studio wall and May holding up that vase. This is a very popular concept in the years leading up to Garber's, shall we say, his recruitment as a figure painter. And what's common in all of these pictures is quiet. They have this quality of restfulness and serenity. They have often a story of light in them, like the studio wall, which is about the play of light across that back wall. The same in the de Camp, the light playing across the figure from one side. And they have this environment of gentility to them, of peaceful interiors, of graceful, elegant women. And sometimes, especially as you can see in the one on the right, figures set against a window. This was called contre-jour. It literally means against the day, showing a figure silhouetted against a strong light. And it comes with a problem because you can see that when you set a figure against a bright window, you lose all the detail in that figure and they become very dark. And that is true for both of these pictures too. These are two other figures.
So then we'll center around a person, Willard Metcalf, born in 1858, died in 1925. One of America's most important Impressionist landscape painters. I realize I have to be careful about that moniker here in Bucks County. A place, the Florence Griswold House in Old Lyme, Connecticut, and you see on the screen a recent photograph of the house, an older photograph of the house on the right, and its owner, Florence Griswold, sitting on the front porch of the house. The house was the turn of the 20th century home of a ship captain's daughter, Florence Griswold, whom you see here, and its surroundings. And these were, as I mentioned, in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And just to situate you, Old Lyme is situated in the southeastern part of the state, where the Connecticut River meets Long Island Sound, halfway between New York City and Boston. And at the turn of the 20th century, it became a locus of activity for American Impressionist artists, and was where Metcalf spent 3 summers. Seeing a photo of it in the snow that we all wish we had, or at least some of us wish we had this winter. Metcalf spent 3 summers there, 1905, 1906, when he completed May Night, and 1907, a really relatively brief period for what would become a 50-year career, yet absolutely pivotal to his artistic development and his financial success. The paintings he created in Old Lyme were acclaimed by critics, sought out by collectors and museums, and critical for his subsequent reputation as a major figure in American art. Above all, the most important painting he created during that pivotal time in his life and in his entire career, May Night, which is also his most famous painting, this moonlit view of the Florence Griswold house that earned the artist his first national prize. Old Lyme and the Florence Griswold house have much meaning for Metcalf, who, as one of his contemporaries tells us, was, quote, completely absorbed by nature. He devoted days there to painting en plein air, in the open air. In fact, here's a Frank Benson watercolor of Metcalf sketching in the open air from 1921, a little bit later than May 9th. Evenings of leisurely meals at Florence Griswold's house, and this wonderful slide of artists sitting on the porch, a really kind of bohemian looking back at us, at the viewers. In fact, Metcalf spent late nights collecting moths by candlelight from his attic window, including this one. It was a place where, as Metcalf put it, quote, every day is so in line with work, end quote, whether that work was collecting moths or sketching or painting. So a little bit about Metcalf himself before we delve into May Night. Little in his career, actually prior to the success of May Night, the Corcoran's painting prepared him for the transformation that resulted from the painting's public exhibition in 1907, the year after he painted it. Like the generation older artist James McNeil Whistler, Metcalf was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, a working class town, to a carpenter and violinist father, Greenleaf Metcalf, and a loom tender mother, Margaret Gallo. At about 16 years old, Metcalf began to paint and take drawing classes, apprenticed to a wood engraver. And the next year, he began a brief apprenticeship with George Loring Brown, a painting by whom you see here on the screen of Italian scenery. But Metcalf's dislike for the classical motifs embraced by Brown soon equaled Metcalf's dislike for Brown himself. Soon after, Metcalf became one of the first students at the newly established School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where he studied art as well as anatomy under William Rimmer, whose painting Flight and Pursuit I'm showing you here. And in the ensuing years, Metcalf supported himself primarily as an illustrator, most notably documenting the Zuni Indians of New Mexico for Harper's Magazine, and also painting in Maine and elsewhere, including a brief stint in Cuba. You see an image from Cuba on the right. Like most young American art students of his day, Metcalf decided to travel to Paris, departing in 1883, returning in 1888, and taking up his study at the Académie Julienne. This is a painting by Chalfant of Bouguereau's atelier at the Académie Julienne from 1891, to give you a sense of where Metcalf would have been studying. It was the most popular of the Paris studios. In a crowded, dimly lit, although this is not quite so dimly lit, poorly ventilated and often rowdy hall, artists set up their easels in front of a hired model, as here, received occasional critiques from the studio's masters, and followed a rigorous program of study of the human figure, which might eventually qualify them for admission into the annual Paris Salon. To escape the rigors of this rather bleak-sounding academic training, Metcalf, along with his American friends Frank Weston Benson, out of whom we've heard some this afternoon, John Twachtman, Edward Simmons, and Emil Carlson, frequented the nearby artist colonies, and Metcalf became one of the first artists to visit Monet and Giverny, the picturesque spot along the Epte River, a tributary of the Seine in northwest France, where Monet had made his home since 1883. Here I'm showing you a painting by Metcalf, Sunlight and Shadow, along with, of course, one of the Water Lilies paintings by Monet from 1907. The reason for Metcalf's first visit to Giverny in 1886 was not only the appeal of the picturesque countryside and its charm, and the chance to paint alongside and learn from the great French master. It was more likely a combination of this opportunity and that to expand his bird egg collection, which you see here. Bird egg collections. There were incredible, many birds' eggs in these collections. We know that he tutored Monet's son and stepson in botany and mythology. And just as a little aside, there's an amazing cache of these materials at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, which I highly encourage you to visit if you haven't already. And his collections, so meticulously labeled. I mean, these are real kind of artist scientists in this way, and stored in the original furniture that Metcalf owned. And I always remember when I look at this collection of not paintings, of course there are many great paintings, but a collection of birds' eggs that not too many years ago, it was the Florence Griswold Museum almost deaccessioned the entire collection of birds' eggs and butterfly specimens that Metcalf collected. Thank goodness they did not, because they played such an important role in the recent exhibition held at of Metcalf's art and science, I guess you would call it, held at the Florence Griswold Museum. Metcalf returned to Giverny, which is another view of the bird's eggs. Metcalf returned to Giverny the next 2 summers, and may indeed have been responsible for enticing a number of other American artists to visit there as well, such as Theodore Robinson, John Senior Sargent, Theodore Butler, John Leslie Breck, and many others. After returned from Europe in 1888, he earned a minimal income and even more meager critical attention from a combination of landscape, portraiture, illustration, and teaching. He showed a few works with some success, including Midsummer Twilight in the National Gallery's collection from 1888, which is a nearly tonal rendering of the beautiful Giverny rooftops that received a silver medal at the Paris Exposition in 1900, another medal at the Buffalo in 1902. And during these years, Metcalf also played an important role in the 10 American painters we've heard about from Kathy, and there they are. Metcalf, I believe, is the one, the man who is in the front row, second from left, seated. This group of artists, as we learned from Kathy, working in New York City and Boston, led primarily by Hassan, Twachtman, and Weir, and members who had resigned from the Society of American Artists in 1897 because of its very large exhibitions and conservative policies. And there are other artists that we've heard about also, Benson, DeCamp doing, of course, Metcalf, Reed, Simmons, and Tarbell. And they advocated small exhibitions with no conventional organization, and they were one of the first American groups to defect like this, to set up an independent organization of larger official bodies. During 1904, not long again after he came back, some years after he came back from Paris, but Metcalf spent some time in Maine living with his parents on his father's $12 a month Civil War pension. And during this period, he began to paint in an Impressionist style, or perhaps continued to, in canvases such as the Mill Pond, 1904. He began to compile a scrapbook while in Maine of newspaper and magazine reviews of his exhibitions, which again, he had not had huge success, which he labeled with the phrase, he labeled this scrapbook with the phrase, quote, "A partial history of the Renaissance," end quote. As Metcalf's biographers have noted, the comment seems both appropriate and prescient. He had put the Dark Ages behind him, his Dark Ages, and would soon fulfill what he had long believed was his destiny, to become one of the finest artists of his generation. And I'm showing you here a Monet painting on the left. It's a wonderful, from 1905, of Poppy Garden, Metcalf painting on the left, the Poppy Garden, and Monet's Poppy Field on the right from 1890, showing some affinities, even though difference in time between these two painters and paintings. Metcalf first visited Old Lyme, Connecticut in 1905, and was inspired by the invitation of Child Hassan, his old friend and fellow member of the 10. And he had spent 2 summers there already. And Metcalf was also responding to an invitation from Miss Florence Griswold, known as Miss Florence. Metcalf was embarking on the most pivotal period of his career and spent the summers of 1905, 1906, and 1907 in Old Lyme, so vital to his artistic development and his professional success. And neither his own painting nor American Impressionism would ever be the same again. The late Georgian-style home of Florence Griswold, seen again here, exterior and interior, both wonderful images with Miss Florence, had in recent years, before Metcalf began going there in 1905, become a locus of activity for American Impressionist and tonalist artists. It was the 1899 visit of American Barbizon painter Henry Ward Ranger that led to the Lyme art colony's initial growth. Ranger and other artists had visited the art colonies of France and were eager, of course, to recreate their experiences here in America. Of course, this led to the birth of a number of art colonies around the country at about this time. Old Lyme and others, as I mentioned, other artist colonies came at this time, including the art colony here in Bucks County. These colonies served as the perfect base for operation. Artists like Metcalf had the advantage of a bucolic painting environment, as well as good proximity to patrons and exhibition venues in New York City, Boston, and also here for Bucks County, of course, Philadelphia, and Washington. And we can't, as you probably know, can't underestimate the importance of the railroad in the development of American painting during this period, American Impressionism.
When you look at Garber, you say that there's a connection with Whistler, or I don't thinking, or with doing, that kind of etherealized, wispy, vague femininity that seemed to fascinate those guys. I mean, that's one difference. Garber, it's rooted.
It's very grounded,
Right.
yeah. I do see that as well. It is, I mean, all I can think of when I look at that painting is sort of weightlessness, not in the house so much, but even somewhat in the house.